Okay, hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Web Accessibility from Legal Risk to Growth for New York Businesses. To introduce myself, I'm Abby, a business development rep here at Accessibility and a native New Yorker. And joining me today is Kelly Simino, a disabilities rights attorney, and I'll pass it over to her.
Thanks, Abby, so much, and it's so great to be here. Just to introduce myself, today I'm going to be helping put some perspective around the legal framework on legal issues related to web accessibility. As part of my background, when I was 16 years old, I was in a car wreck and I was paralyzed from the waist down from a spinal cord injury. From that point on, I started navigating the world with a different lens, looking at ways things needed to become more accessible. And certainly we can see how the web and its importance into all of our lives, why web accessibility truly is a marker for everyone these days. Today, I'm a practicing lawyer based out of Washington, D.C., and I focus my practice on helping people with disabilities navigate legal issues and informing the broader community about issues that face the disability community. So it's great to be here today.
And thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it, and we're looking forward to your insight. All right, so here's a bird's eye view of what we'll be covering today in today's webinar. We're going to go over a few things, starting off with what web accessibility is, the legal aspects of web accessibility and their impact on your business, the benefits of web accessibility, and make sure you stick around until the end to see a live demonstration of our AI-powered solution called the Access Widget. So to kick things off, let's talk about what web accessibility is. I'm sure many of you are asking yourself this question. Web accessibility refers to the practice of designing and developing websites, tools, and technologies in a way that allows people with disabilities to perceive, understand, and interact with them effectively. So essentially, this ensures equal access and usability for all users, including those with visual, auditory, motor, or cognitive impairments. So if you're a website owner, business owner, or have anything to do with websites, it's imperative to know about web accessibility. And it's okay if you don't know much because we're going to help you out with that today. So at least 90% of websites are inaccessible to people with disabilities. Making your website accessible isn't just the right thing to do, it's also a huge business opportunity. The disability community represents a massive $8 trillion in annual spending power. So prioritizing accessibility helps drive diversity and inclusion, ensures compliance with legal standards, and aligns with best practices. So essentially, it's a win-win for businesses and users alike. Okay, so now that we know what web accessibility is and the potential market, I would love to introduce Kelly Simino, who will go into rules and regulations of web accessibility, as well as the legal implications as previously mentioned. Kelly, take it away.
Okay, great. So let's start really where we are looking at the framework of accessibility. And that comes down to the Americans with Disabilities Act, also known as the ADA. I'm sure many of you have heard of it, and there's different titles that belong under the ADA, but including like for public accommodations, to communications, to employment, and so forth. But the ADA is a piece of federal legislation, really a monumental piece of federal legislation that was signed into law on July 26, 1990. So over 30, now almost 35 years ago, to make sure that people with disability have the same rights as everyone else. I'm a wheelchair user, I'm a manual wheelchair user. So what the ADA meant to me when it became into legislation was that I would be able to have more ability to access places going out by curb cuts or ramps or elevators. But let's be honest in understanding that back in 1990, the digital landscape does not look like in any way, shape, or form like it does today. And while there may have been some form of the internet, that certainly was not on the forefront of the legislators' minds in 1990, which ultimately leads us to today is, does the ADA apply to websites? And what I can tell you is, in a short answer, is yes, it does. Um, So while we know that the original legislative legislation predated the internet, in 2022, the Department of Justice looked at this issue and confirmed that the ADA's requirements apply to all goods, services, privileges, and activities offered by public accommodations, including those offered by websites. So, just as I have the ability to have public accommodation for me to roll into a brick and mortar store and have a ramp to get in it, so too should people have the ability to access public space on the internet, those with visual impairments or who have paralysis or other needs that they need to utilize different tools to get on the internet. But the reality is that while the DOJ has really affirmed that the ADA does apply and has stated why, it still leaves questions out there about the regulations and the control and really setting it forth in a very definitive way. And what I think is going to ultimately happen is there will be some kind of potential legislation down the road that would further define web accessibility. Why do I think that? Well, because we've already seen it try to get some traction in Congress. Back in 2022, the Websites and Software Application Accessibility Act was introduced in both the Senate and the House. And what that legislation was put into Congress was to affirm that the ADA prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities, and specifically in the use of website, software applications, the apps on our phones, and other digital technologies. So while that particular piece of legislation did not pass and become federal law, there are eyes on it. Congress is working on it. And in the future, we will see a piece of legislation that I think further defines the web accessibility standards. So now, if the Department of Justice has affirmed that the ADA is part of our looking at the web accessibility, then it comes down to, okay, you're a business owner. I have to be accessible, but what does that mean in the space of websites? So the WCAG, the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, is our roadmap right now for defining accessibility on the web. So it's internationally recognized, not just in the US, but internationally recognized guidelines that are cited by courts when they're looking at website accessibility legal matters, and also that are cited in like the legislation I just mentioned, as far as how do we implement accessibility on the web. It was developed by the W3C, which is an organization of a kind of governing body, and it defines best practices and design rules related to web accessibility. So different, technical specifications that you need, that's going to fall under the WCAG. Oh, and sorry, you can go back for a sec. And what does that, one more forward. There we go. So what does that mean in practicality? The WCAG on the right side of the screen, you'll see it means that your website needs to be usable by a screen reader. It needs to be able to have keyboard navigation. You can use your keyboard to navigate your website. The way that the design and the UI is implemented. Also, issues like being seizure safe, where it eliminates like certain lighting or different movements that could provoke a seizure in a person. And then comprehensible content, meaning that anyone can get on a site and really be able to digest what's in it. Okay, thanks, Abby.
Of course.
So we know that there are now through the ADA, websites have to be accessible. So how are we seeing that play out in the legal landscape? And to be honest, what we're seeing is a dramatic increase in web accessibility cases being filed. Meaning, if you're a business owner and you're operating a website that is not accessible for people with disabilities, then you're at risk at having a demand letter sent or a lawsuit filed against you. So, people want websites to be accessible, which means enforcement of accessibility regulations is on the rise. If you look at the graph on the screen, you can see year to year a steady growth, and specifically look at 2023. There was a 13% growth in the number of web accessibility websites that were filed, over 4,600. Um, we anticipate, if we're looking at 2024, that data is being crunched right now, that number is going to be higher. And we see the projection continuing to rise year on year. More people are looking at it. People understand the importance of websites, and they are willing to take action to force companies to become accessible and inclusive to all individuals. Now, we're talking on this graph just about lawsuits. That means an action that has been filed in court. However, I will tell you that many, many, many more businesses are getting what's called a demand letter. More than 8,000 businesses every month receive a demand letter, which essentially says, we have looked at your website. It is not accessible for people with disabilities. It is not in compliance with WCAG, WCAG. And if you don't fix it, we're going to file a lawsuit to make you. So just keep in mind that risk is very evident just based on the numbers. And, this picture always, I think, is a very great way to represent what we're seeing as far as the legal risk in web accessibility. You see a big glacier poking, you see a glacier poking out of the water. And if you're if you're looking at it, all you see is a glacier above. In this case, we can define that as the over 4,600 web accessibility lawsuits that were filed in 2023. But what we don't see is under the surface. And that's even a bigger, more massive problem. And that is that most cases are settled before even being filed, or certainly before going to a trial. So the picture is much larger. The risk is much heavier if you really look beneath the surface. And what does that mean for business owners? Well, I think as I'm a business owner myself, and so I look at it as like, what are my bottom lines? Like, what does this cost me? I will say, I also look at it as what is the right thing to do? How can I serve and be more inclusive to all people? But businesses are paying a major price for continuing to operate their websites without accessibility in mind. The average cost, if you get a demand letter sent to you, saying that you are not in compliance with the ADA, your website is not accessible, there are some hard dollar costs to receiving that demand letter. And those include the attorney's fees from the person bringing it. If a person is successful in their claim, the business has to not only pay their own lawyers, but also the lawyers of the person bringing the action. So the plaintiff's law firm could be between $5,000 and $15,000. And this is just in a demand letter phase, not talking about litigation. Your own defense attorney, I mean, very conservatively, $5,000, very conservatively. And then at the end of the day, the settlement, the resolution, what is that going to mean? That's going to mean remediating your website, making it accessible. And that could range between $5,000 and $20,000. All of these I feel like are very conservative numbers, but it could add up for just one demand letter up to $40,000. So it's important as a business owner to really get ahead of the web accessibility curve. We see the patterns, we see the projections, and we know what the law requires, and now we need to get ahead of it to eliminate that legal risk. So today was a specific webinar for people who operate businesses in New York. And why was that important for Accessibility to bring this webinar on? And it's this graph right here. Um, New York is getting more lawsuits filed related to web accessibility than any other state in the US by not a little, but by a lot. Um, you know, and so that risk is quite, if you are looking across the US, if you're a brick and mortar in Tennessee and have a website there, or you're operating in Tennessee, you're gonna have a lot less risk than if you're in New York. But to be clear, and what a lot of people don't realize is that having a website in the digital space, if you don't have to be physically located in New York to feel that impact. As long as you're selling something to a customer in New York, that person can bring a claim against you in New York. And that's actually kind of why we see that big number for New York, is because a lot of people, you know, either the consumer or the business may not be located in New York, but because it's a, online presence, a shopping, people can be located anywhere. And jurisdiction where a lawsuit can be filed has over and over been put into New York. And the last thing I think that's important to kind of wrap this all together as we're evaluating legal risk, we've talked about the progression of more and more cases being filed. We've talked about the fact that New York has the majority of those cases being filed. And to really narrow in on that, websites, e-commerce businesses face a higher risk of legal action. If you look at this graph, it very clearly shows 75% of those lawsuits that are being filed are against e-commerce businesses. Only 25, right under 25% are other kinds of businesses. So consumer goods, retail, those are the websites that are being hit the hardest for not being accessible. So e-commerce businesses face much greater risk at accessibility related lawsuits than any other industry.
Thank you so much for that, Kelly. That was very, very insightful. I learned a few things as well.
Yeah.
So I'm sure some of you are wondering if your website is accessible, or how do you check, or where do you even get started? And I do want you to take out your phone with the camera on. And if you're curious about your website compliance score, scan this QR code on the screen. This will take you to our free auditing tool called the Access Scan, where you can run an audit of your website, or you can type in accessibility.com/access scan to see where your website stands today. So our Access Scan is designed to give you an accurate audit of your compliance status, and it only takes a few minutes. So we're going to give everyone a couple of minutes to scan this, and if you're unable to scan it right now, that's totally fine. After the webinar, we're going to send you an email with a link for it. Okay, now that everyone had the chance to get an audit of your website web accessibility compliance, now we're going to dive into business and growing your business with an accessible website and what that means for you as the business owner. All right, so let's get into some of the many benefits of web accessibility because there are quite a lot. I'm going to start off with a major benefit is SEO optimization and the increase in organic traffic. So a recent study by SEMrush found that 73% of accessible websites tracked saw more traffic to their website, and 66% saw an increase in organic traffic. Now, I can imagine a business of any size would welcome that traffic. So SEO ranking really rewards and prioritizes accessible websites. And I totally get it. Sometimes the cost in deciding whether or not to do the right thing, can come into effect. And I get it. So what's important to note is that businesses can receive up to $5,000 in tax credits for implementing web accessibility. So if you're a small to medium-sized business, this can really cover the cost, and essentially it comes at no cost to you. So I want to share a quick stat that a lot of people aren't that familiar with. And 1 in 4 people have a disability. So that's at least 25% of the population. Knowing this means that businesses are missing out on a huge market. Recent studies have shown that at least 90% of websites are inaccessible. So once a person with a disability finds a website that they can navigate, the likelihood of them coming back highly increases, opposed to them going to find a different website that they can navigate. So this increases loyalty because they know that your competitors are not accessible. And before I move on, I like to share this scenario that I often, can relate to this. Have you ever been shopping and you wanted to make a purchase, and when you're looking around for help, there's no one there? When you get to the register, there's no one there to help you check out? I'm sure we've all been there. So this is relatable to web accessibility. A person with a disability can get frustrated not being able to check out and ends up leaving your site. So when you make your website accessible, they're able to reach the shopping cart and make their purchase. This reduces churns because they are able to check out, and I'll show you this in a demo later. That brings me to my next point of reaching new audiences and driving more sales. As I mentioned earlier, the disability community have a spending power of $8 trillion. That's a lot. So that's a huge benefit to reach new audiences and drive more sales. Inclusive brands have done better than exclusive brands historically. So I like to use analogies, so I'll use another one, and this one goes with fishing. If you're fishing, would you rather use a smaller net or a larger net? I think a lot of us would rather use that large net to catch more fish, right? Essentially, this is similar in which an accessible website now has access to a larger audience, otherwise you did not have access to. Okay, so I touched on a few benefits of making your website accessible. Let's talk about the business risk of not making your website accessible, besides the legal aspect that Kelly covered for us. An inaccessible website is a missed opportunity. I always say this. So, as this unlocks a market with high buying intent and spending power, it's a major revenue potential. And let's take a look at some of these facts that we have on the screen here. So, when we spoke about how this can reduce this churn, take a look at the first one. This states that 28% of shoppers with disability may abandon a purchase because of accessibility issues. This goes back to the scenario where you might be shopping and there's no one there to help. Next, we can see that, we have 73.4% of websites that implement an accessibility solution saw an increase in organic traffic. I do want to point out that consumers with disability shop online nearly twice as often as the average consumer. And as I mentioned earlier, brands who are inclusive, do better than brands who simply are not. So as a business owner, you showing the effort by making it accessible for all shows that you are also committing to inclusivity. The stat shows that 2 out of 3 Americans say their social values shape their shopping choices. Essentially, inclusion is one way to increase your customer loyalty. So the bottom line, I would say, is that inaccessible websites are missing out on revenue. And as we can see, business risk losing over $6.9 billion per year as people with disabilities choose to buy elsewhere. That's a huge stat. All right, now that we've discussed what web accessibility is, the legal standards and expectations, as well as the downside of being inaccessible, I'm happy to get to the point of your accessibility and compliance journey and what that may look like with a company like Accessibility. I want to introduce everyone to one of our feature products, the Access widget. With the Access widget, you can ensure your website meets compliance standards and inclusivity while also reducing potential legal risk. So as you can see on the screen, we have this loop, this long line in a loop. Here's how our Access widget installation and implementation works in 5 simple steps. So we work with most CMS platforms such as your WordPress, your Wix, etc. And it's also easy to customize to your liking to fit your business design and aesthetic. Our Access widget scans, analyzes, and fixes issues on your website using AI, which I'll also demonstrate later. To showcase your inclusion, you receive an accessibility statement showing your compliant efforts. And what we like to call it is the real magic. It's in the ongoing daily remediation where Access widget scans all of the elements on your page of your website every 24 hours looking for issues to fix. So with the Access widget, you can ensure your website meets compliance standards and inclusivity while also reducing potential legal risks. So now that we understand how the Access widget works, let's see it live in action. All right, so what we're taking a look at right now is your typical e-commerce website that I'm sure we've all visited before. A telltale sign that a website is using Accessibility's Access widget is by this icon on the bottom left of the screen. So I do want to remind everyone that this can be customized to your own liking and your brand's aesthetic. So you can change the color, change the shape, orientation, and even if you want to have it hidden, you can also do that. So now we can identify the Access widget. We're going to go into it. The first thing I want to share is this statement right here, our accessibility statement. What this does is allow users who visit your website to understand what the Access widget is doing on the front end and the back end, which I'll get into later. I do want to remind everyone that this also allows everyone to understand what we are currently adhering to, which is the WCAG 2.1 at the AA levels. I always also saw that some website owners, they choose to have this as its own standalone page. So if you want, you can take this out and have it as its own standalone page showing your efforts. Or if you don't want to do that, you know that it does live here as well, and you can get to it at any time. So within the Access widget, as we can see, we have set profiles that we have designed with the disability community. And as we scroll down, we have individual adjustments from content adjustments, color adjustments, and orientation adjustments, which I'll get into as well. So before we get into one of our accessibility profiles, I want to show you a little bit of the website so that we understand what it's really doing. So we're on a typical e-commerce website, and I want to point out, you see this moving image here where it says 40% off and shop now. It's going from a chair to a credenza to lounges. And as we scroll down some more, we do see this image of this nice young lady and an older gentleman jump in, having a good time. What I'm going to do now is turn on our seizure safe profile. So this profile enables epileptic and seizure-prone users to browse safely by eliminating the risk of seizures that results from flashing or blinking animations and risky color combination. So as we can see, this animation stopped right in its tracks, and if we pay attention, we can see that the saturation is now a little bit lower. And it doesn't stop there. As we scroll up, remember that first image I showed you guys? That also has stopped moving. So essentially, this is how this would help a user browse your website with a little bit more seamless. So we're going to turn that off. And as we can see, it goes back without interfering with anything else on the website. So the next profile I'm going to show you guys is the vision impaired profile. And this profile adjusts the website so that it is accessible to the majority of visual impairments, such as degrading eyesight, tunnel vision, cataracts, glaucoma, and others. And what I'm going to point out is you see how this is now bold. Now the color is more saturated and it's more striking to the user. So this is going to help them navigate your website with a little bit more ease. So we're going to turn that off, and now we're going to get into some of the individual adjustments. So if you like, you can also do this, and we have quite a few from font to line height. One of my favorite is the content scaling. So my vision is not the best. So I prefer when the website is a little bit closer to my face because I don't like wearing my glasses. So as you can see, as if you scroll up, it brings it closer. And then I do want to let everyone know that you can also scale it down. And we're going to bring that back to default for now. And moving on to color adjustments, as I spoke earlier, we did see how we went from lower saturation to higher saturation. I also want to let you guys know if you want it to be monochromatic, no colors, just black and white, that's also an option that you have. Next, we have orientation adjustments, and you can mute the sound, you can have a big white cursor, but one of my favorites is this read and mask right here. I find it's very useful when I'm on a website that has like a lot of font and reading. It makes it a little bit more easier for me to pay attention to where my cursor is. So this highlighted section follows your cursor wherever it goes on the page, and it kind of blocks out everything else so that you're not as distracted. So we saw a little bit of the front end adjustments, but you guys know my favorite word is where the magic happens, and that's on the back end adjustments. And before I do that, what I'm going to do is turn off the axis widget. And what I want everyone to pay attention to right now is that you see these icons and you see this living room tab. It has a drop-down menu. I'm pointing that out. You see the cart. So when a website isn't using Accessibility's Access widget and I start to tab through, as we can see, yes, we get to the social media, we get to search, but that living room just bypassed. We can't get into that. And as I keep tabbing, look, we skip the profiles, we skip sign up, we skip favorite, and we skip the shopping cart, which is very, very important. So as you can see, a user would have an issue getting to the shopping cart to check out. We're going to scroll back up, and what we're going to do now is turn on the Access widget. I do want to share that users who may use a screen reader, typically when they visit a website, they will start to tab. So now that we have the Access widget back on, I'm going to start to tab. And you can see right here we have a check mark. And what this has done was turn on the keyboard navigation and the blind users mode. And now we're going to continue to tab as we did before, but we're going to see some changes. So now I'm tabbing, and as you can see, we are now at the living room drop-down menu. So now a user is able to access these individual pages, and importantly, they're able to get to that shopping cart and check out. And as I'm tabbing through, we can even see some of the brands, and then we continue to tab through. So that's just a little bit of the magic of the Access widget and what it can do to help users navigate. But it doesn't just stop there. So we see this picture right here. You and I, we can probably see that it's a chair with a plant. What I'm going to do is turn off the Access widget. Again, you know. And what I'm going to do is now inspect it. All right, so I want you guys to take a look at this section over here that I have highlighted. So essentially, if a user is using a screen reader, this is what is going to be read to them. It says IMG, assets, IMG, new.jpg. So we have an understanding that JPG is probably an image, but it doesn't give us much context as to what it really is. So we're going to come out of that, and what we're going to do now is turn back on that Access widget. And then we're going to make sure we have the keyboard navigation and blind user mode on. And that sound is a telltale sign that it is on as well. So we're going to go back into that image and inspect it. So now what the Accessibility's Access widget have done is update that alt text so that we can understand some more context as to what's really going on in that image. And as you can see right here that I have highlighted, it says a white chair is sitting next to a potted plant. I think that's a little bit more descriptive and gives more context to a user that visits your website. Okay, so now that we've seen the Access widget and we've seen how it's worked in action and we see the front end and the back end adjustments, what I'm gonna do now is get into some questions. I see that we have a few in the chat, so I'm gonna read a few of them out. Okay, so we have the first question from Grace who asks, does it work with my website built on a particular platform such as WordPress, Shopify, etc.? And I'll take this one. Access Widget is a session-based tool that works on all static websites / CMS and web-based applications such as your WordPress, Shopify, WooCommerce, and more. So yes, we do. And we have another question, and this one is from Linda. So it says, does the size of my website matter? And I think I'm going to give this one to Kelly.
Okay, and what I'm guessing is Linda's asking, like, does it matter how big my website or small my website may be related to the legal risk I may have? And, to just basically stated, no company is exempt from the ADA. So if we look at the kinds of cases that have been brought against businesses for lack of web accessibility under the ADA, we've seen small businesses to very, very large businesses, smaller websites to very large websites. And so, any and every type of company is at risk to be sued if your website's not accessible.
Love it. So I see Tom ask a really good question. Will Access Widget slow down my website or affect the regular UI UX at all? And that's a commonly asked question that we get. So I guess this is more of an SEO question. So first, to quickly answer, no. The Access Widget won't slow down your website or negatively impact the UI/UX. So in fact, it actually boosts the SEO, as I mentioned earlier, with the recent study from SEMrush. And then we also have other studies from like accessibilitychecker.com and BuiltWith, who've done a lot of studies as well. And like I mentioned earlier, 73.4 of websites saw an increase. And it also boosts organic traffic as well. So on average, websites experience about a 12% boost after implementing these updates. All right, and we have another question. This one is from Ronnie. I love this question. Why should I buy now? I can deal with it if I get sued. And I think Kelly can take that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not your lawyer, Ronnie, but I am a lawyer. And so what I would say is, in terms of the law, like, you don't want to take the chance. You don't want to risk getting to the place that you're getting sued. Um, Even if you remediate your site after the fact, like after you receive a demand letter, you can still be up against attorney's fees and other kinds of damages. And so, and the plaintiff could still move forward with a lawsuit. So, while again, from my perspective, having an accessible website is the right thing to do, and we should always make business decisions starting there. As with my lawyer cap on, I would say that there is a risk, and it's not a risk worth taking. And then finally, what Abby talked about is, you're boosting traffic. You're helping your SEO efforts. I mean, there's a lot of your website's reputation is boosted because I can tell you, as a member of the disability community, we are very brand loyal and we appreciate when people think about accessibility, think about being inclusive. So there's a lot of reasons why it doesn't make sense to wait.
And that is it for today. And first, I want to thank you, Kelly, for joining us today and taking time. We really appreciate it. You did an amazing job explaining to everyone the legal aspects of digital accessibility. And second, I want to thank the rest of you for being curious about making your website accessible. We still have a long way to go before the entire internet is accessible, but you taking the interest today, we really appreciate that. And I just want to make sure everyone knows that after this webinar, we will send you a recording of this webinar so that you can replay it or share with other people members of your team, anyone. And for additional questions, make sure you go on to Accessiby's website, accessiby.com, to schedule a call with myself or one of my beautiful colleagues to find out more about how you can get these solutions on your website today. And if you want, you can also just shoot us an email at hello@accessiby.com, and our support team will reach out to you and answer any additional questions you may have. But before you go, don't leave yet. I also encourage you all to stay and fill out the survey that we have because we want some feedback. We want to know how we did today, and your opinion really matters to us. So thank you again, and I hope everyone have a great rest of their day.